Okay, today we're continuing with Robert Avens, the new Gnosis, in Chapter 1, Soul and World, Section 2, Toward an Ensouled World. And so this is a continuation on the work with Heidegger that we were doing last time. Basically, we're trying to answer questions about the re-ensoulment of the world, and we're using the work of James Hillman and Heidegger to help us do that. And so, again, we're sort of left in this split that we see coming through Jung and others, that there's a split between the ideas that we have and things. And the idea of re-ensouling the world is to re-establish a way of being in the world that can mediate between these. And then the question becomes how? How do we do that? And how can Heidegger and his phenomenology help us with this? So in the Heidegger episode, we were talking about a lot of Heideggerian terms and exploring them: being, Dasein, existence, truth, thinking, and so on. And we're basically going to map those over to uh, terms from Hillman, such as soul and imagination. Now, Evans is beginning with Hillman's statement that ideas are both that which one sees, an appearance or shape in a concrete sense, and that by means of which one sees. We see them and by means of them. Ideas are both the shape of events and the modes that make possible our ability to see through events into their pattern. Okay, what are we talking about here? Well, part of this sort of diagnosis that we've got through Jung is that when we lost a functional ecology of practices in the transition from the Holocene, I'm going to say, into a more sedentary and agrarian way of living that involves cities and civilization, and particularly role specialization, that we see this split within society not only into different classes or castes, but also the split within people. So that, for example, the typology in Jung, thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting, these become split into different faculties, whereas previously they were integrated. And if we apply this to ideas, well, our experience of ideas is in the realm of thinking, right? We don't sense them, we don't feel them necessarily. And what we're trying to do is essentially recover that. And this is kind of what it means to re-ensoul things. If we, so there's deep interconnection between the ideas that we have, our thinking, let's say, and the actual material objects in the world. And re-ensoulment is this work of mapping them back together so that ideas are no longer only thought, but they are sensed and felt and intuited as well as thought in relation to the real things that we see. And this idea that we can see ideas and also see by means of them is a kind of trap that we might fall into. We might fall into the trap of reifying ideas by making them into actual objects or what we perceive to be real objects, instead of considering them in relation to the things of this world. And so to escape that trap of reifying ideas, well, I wouldn't call it a trap, I would call it an imbalance. The idea would be to recover, in this case, Heideggerian sense of phenomenology. So doing philosophy by exploring ideas as a perspective that we can take, as a mode of being in the world. For Vervaeke, I would connect this with the term theoria. So part of the etymology of contemplate has to do with temple, contemplate. And this is what I've connected here is that if you imagine sitting in a meditative position, you might even do this if you're playing along at home. If you sit in such a way that your legs are crossed and your spine is aligned, then I perceive a kind of triangle form. I'm talking about a three-dimensional pyramid, um, a three-faced, three-sided pyramid that is created from the points of the knees to the top of the head. There's a line. There are three lines that I see, one going from the base of the spine up to the head, and similarly from each of the knees. And this is a kind of, I would call this inhabiting the form of a temple. And so this is part of the reason why the particular way that we sit when we meditate or when we contemplate, which are not the same, the way that we sit can be really important. And the reason that contemplation is relevant here is because by contemplating, it's one route to insight. And insight is usually, I see a connection between insights that we get and theories that we have. So when we have an insight into something by contemplating deeply, usually we have a sense of theoria. And what I mean by that is that we can see more deeply into the world. And we see by means of the insight, we see by means of the ideas that are generated by insights. And so if an idea is not a thing, it's instead a way of seeing in the world. It's we see by means of ideas. So for example, with the ideas that I was just naming about contemplation, I was able to see more deeply into my meditation practice by, I would say, understanding why um, sitting in a particular way is effective for those practices. That's all more or less by way of introduction as to why it can be valuable to treat ideas in a phenomenological way that can help us take them up like clothing, like a perspective that we take on so that we can see into reality in a different way and kind of doing this bridge building between the the most abstract aspects and the most material, physical, concrete. Okay. Avens now wants to make the point here that, like last time we were talking a lot about Heidegger and his sort of vilification of Plato, where we've sort of inherited this correspondence theory of truth, this idea that there's a match between our ideas and reality. And we're wanting to push back on that using Heideggerian language. So Heidegger talks about, for example, the forgetfulness of being, which is, I would connect this with a sort of state of being unconscious in the world, forgetting the significance of our existing, of our being here. And this forgetfulness of being, or this kind of unconsciousness that I'm calling, is connected with this way of considering ideas as things. So if we consider truth to be this something to speculate about, Evans is saying, a distinct realm of ideas. This is this correspondence notion of truth, that there are truths that are in some separate realm away from reality. This is a way of reifying those ideas, making them real apart from reality, by which I mean material reality. And this goes along with our forgetfulness of being. And so there's the notion here is that by restoring a phenomenological facility with ideas, by being able to see through ideas and experience them not as separate entities that are things, but by restoring our capacity to see by means of ideas, that we can actually recover consciousness of our being here, and overcome what Heidegger calls the forgetfulness of being. So essentially what we're trying to do is recover consciousness of being. And we're exploring a ideas instead of as objects. We're treating ideas as modes of seeing, ways of seeing. Quote, that by means of which one sees. Avens then points out that if that's the case, if ideas can be taken up as perspectives, if they can be modes of our being, then they can actually change along with our states of consciousness, and indeed with states of the soul. Plato said, the idea is the eye of the soul, the eye of the soul. So that idea is that depending how we feel, depending how we are, if we look through the same idea at the world, we may see things differently. We may experience differently. In Hillman's words, the soul reveals itself in its ideas. The soul reveals itself in its ideas. I think what I would connect here is that through one's ideas, one can be seen. It's so the idea here is taken as a mode of being, a way of being in the world, and it's a kind of aperture. It's a portal through which one can theoria see deeply into the world, but by the same token, that by which one can be seen by the world. What comes up is not only that we contemplate deeply by seeing into the world in this way, but that we can be contemplated. The soul reveals itself in its ideas. And Hillman also, we are always in the embrace of an idea. And again, we see what our ideas, governed by archetypes, allow us to see. We see what our ideas, governed by archetypes, allow us to see. So what I would connect here is that ideas are sort of like we've thought of them as a kind of layer, a thought layer that has a kind of independent reality. And when we start to use the language of depth psychology, as well as the different ways of knowing that we can take from Vervaeke, we start to understand that ideas are grounded, rooted, drawn from deeper layers of being, both in the embodied sense, that they arise from out of our embodied being, but also from archetypal layers. I would say it seems that when we start to treat ideas phenomenologically as modes, as perspectives, then we also start to unlock or uncover the archetypes by which we see. Obviously connected here is John's stuff about insight. So episode 9 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis on the science of insight. And we get these ways that ideas can help us. Like why do we think? You know, and so there's sort of an evolutionary logic here of, well, we can explore out into the world, but then we by and sort of differentiate ourselves into our many ideas by which we see into things. But then those are reintegrated, um, rehomed. And those two sides, that process of differentiating and then integrating is a process of complexifying. That's how complexification works. And that's how our brain works. I'm kind of saying that's how ideas work too. There's a way that if we're interested in ideas at all, that we can take an idea and then take it out into the world, into our life, and explore what does that idea unlock in terms of how we can be in the world, and then sort of integrate our findings, come back and reconvene. And John's stuff about not only insight but then flow and psychedelics as relevant to insight and flow and revelation all becomes relevant. Because if we get stuck in the world, then it's almost as if again, we see what our ideas governed by archetypes allow us to see. We're always in the embrace of an idea. And so it seems that if there is an awareness of some kind of insurmountable obstacle, some trap or some stuckness that we cannot get past, that reconvening and also introverting, like taking that problem deeply within ourselves and dwelling with it. And the insights that can come from that process, they can sort of unlock not only new ideas and new archetypes that go along with those ideas, but actually a new way of being in the world. Okay, so I'm halfway through page 31, and basically what we're wanting to explore from here is like, okay, Sam, all very well to say, let's talk about a different way of thinking, different way of experiencing through ideas in a new way that can unlock different archetypes and allow us to be in the world in a different way. What does that have to do with the soul? Well, if I use the language of Immigrochrist, it would be that we've essentially been caught in not only this propositional tyranny from Vervaeke, but also this very left hemispheric kind of mechanical way of being in the world, where we see ideas as sort of static objects. And we're wanting to restore some of the functionality of the right hemisphere by instead treating our ideas as modes of being, and by so doing, unlocking a kind of aliveness. So what do I mean by that? So I'm sort of saying ideas are, there's something objective about ideas. There's something dead about them, right? But if we take our life force, if we take our energy, and if we have a soul, actually, we can kind of take up an idea and not only contemplate it, but take it on as if it were clothing. And I would say it's the soul which does this. So it's taking a core part of our being where there's something deeply subjective about that. I'm Allow me that language for the time being. So that, like, again, the soul is actually an emergent property of our relationship with the world, which is therefore transjective. But anyway, at the moment, ideas are more objective, and we as subject, as soul, take up those ideas. And if we can practice this, then the anima mundi, the soul of the world, what we mean is a way of being in the world where we can take up these ideas in a way which allows us to be in the world more deeply. Again, I'm using all these metaphors because I don't know, I don't have language for this at the moment. I think what I'm saying is that ideas can become the clothing of the soul, and it means that we have a way of being in the world which is, well, it's bridging all the gaps that we've inherited since Descartes. It's not, we don't have this deep split at that point between subject and object, or between abstract and sensory. The idea is that the perspective of the soul and what that soul can do, in the sense of it's the soul that has this ability to try on this idea and to try on that idea in the world, in life, that can actually restore our sense of an ensouled world, because the world can appear, we can experience living in the world in a completely different way if we have this facility with the soul. The soul is a bridge between ideas and things. We also see here this bridge between the individual and collective aspects of the soul. So when we say anima mundi, soul of the world, well, there's a collective dimension to the world. So if we imagine that each of our individual essences, or that essences is very romantic. What I mean is that each of us has a soul that is like a different facets on a jewel. The idea being that if we put them together in some way, if everyone is able to inhabit the perspective of their soul, then the world is re-enchanted by that and by our living in that way. And to me, this restores um, it restores our sense for the collective dimensions of the soul. So this is where I can start talking, for example, about the soul of humanity. Well, maybe there's something about the soul that is above and beyond. What I mean is in the sense of a team spirit. You know how you can be in a team doing something, and each person can have a particular role. And if everyone sort of optimizes their role, like plays the best that they can in a game, then there can be we can get a sense of something above and beyond everyone's unique individual contribution to a sense of team spirit, something in between everyone that is sort of evoked to kind of emergent property. I'm saying that the same thing is true of our souls, where the more each of us can be in our own souls, the more we can build a sense and also the function of the collective aspect of the soul. Now I'm going to make a link here. We were talking about individual and collective. In the first episode, in page 14, we were talking about a correspondence between inner and outer, or self and world, that corresponds to individual and collective, or micro and macro. So the connection that I want to make here is that if you imagine each of the people, each of the humans, let's say, or each of the beings, if you prefer, through Heidegger, we've been able to sort of restore our sense of Dasein, being here, and through Martin Buber, our sense of the there-ness of people, that people are beings, and that, animals as well, for example. We can restore our sense that we are beings being here, and this is quality of deepening our existential awareness, which in this context is a kind of basis for empathy and connectedness. Well, imagine that if we have that awareness, then we still have sort of islands. These beings are cut off from each other in some ways. So we have this existential awareness of someone's being, the beingness of someone, but we're still cut off. And so there's this focus, if we have that, there's this focus on the individual aspects of the soul or the inner aspects of the soul. What we're still missing is what's networking them together. So it's a kind of lattice. It's a web of relating. So if you imagine this, yeah, I mean it's nodes in a network, right? But I'm saying that the nodes in the network, which we could consider to be the beings, they correspond to the individual aspects of the soul, but the web itself, the relations between and among people, between beings, they are also actually an aspect of the soul, namely the collective aspect. And that's much more connected with the world rather than the self. Do you see what I mean? Because if we just talk about the soul as something within, then and so the idea here is that if I can be in my soul, someone else can be in theirs. If then we can, from that place, actually build and generate, not build, generate a sense, recover a sense that there are aspects of the soul that are only between. And in Plato's language, that the soul has been diffused through the body of the world. That the soul has been diffused through the body of the world. And that entangled in all our relationships are these little facets of the soul. That our soul is not something just within us, but that actually emerges in its individuality and in its collective aspect in our relationships in the world. Then I quote from the Timaeus, wherefore, using the language of probabilities, the language of myth, we may say that the world became a living creature. The world became a living creature. That's so important. That's so important right there. Like we're talking about recovering the mythic sense, a mythic way of life. We're talking about the re-ensoulment of the world. And what we're getting at here is that by exploring these ideas, by inhabiting these ideas from out of the perspective of our soul, we can restore our sense that the world is alive. The world is alive. Where we can start to appreciate that the story that we inherited, that we're alive and we're operating in this dead uh, universe. It's kind of this Newtonian physics that's like billiard balls, that we have all these dead objects, and they're inert and lifeless. Well, this is a very left hemispheric story. But if we can start to unlock new stories, that involve more of the right hemisphere, and indeed involve more of the soul, then we start to understand that it's not just we who are alive. We not only get deeper access to our own vitality, our own sense of aliveness, our own feeling of being alive, but we actually start to sense the aliveness and the vitality of the world. And that not only creates us, it not only deepens that actually like our awareness. I mean, isn't that exciting? Doesn't that isn't that invigorating? Imagine if that were the case. Imagine if there were a way of contemplating and practicing and being in the world such that we could start to experience the world itself as living. Well, that actually deepens our sense of our own aliveness. And this is what I mean by it's much more mythic. It's a much more involved, much more deeply participatory way of being. The idea would be that there's a process of reciprocal opening. A feedback loop can develop between our sense of our own aliveness and the world's sense of its aliveness. So the step here is it's not just that we're observing that what we thought was dead is actually full of living relationship and vitality and soul. And that it's not just that our soul, that we're aware through the extensions of the soul. So it would be not just 4E cognitive science in the sense of embodied, enacted, embedded, and extended mind, but extended soul. Embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended soul. Not only that, but that we actually recover, unlock the capacity to be aware, to be conscious as the world. The idea being that for many millennia now, our sense of self, the focal point of our awareness has been concentrated and focused so that we say that our self is somewhere behind our eyes. What if we can be aware that not only are we an emergent property of all of this, but that we actually get to start becoming aware as that world. The idea that the world itself is awake and living, and we're starting to recover our sense for that. And philosophy, phenomenology, is helping us. That's what we meant by this quote from Plato. Not only that the anima mundi, soul of the world, according to which the soul has been diffused through the body of the world, not just trapped in here somewhere, but also that using the language of myth, we can say that the world has become a living creature and we're starting to recognize the world as a living creature. And Avens is then saying that that concept, which is not a concept, it's a mode of being in the world, recurs in many variations throughout Western history, among the Stoic philosophers, in Plotinus, in Nicholas of Cusa, in German Romanticism, and so on. And so in Hillman's psychology, in James Hillman, that Platonic notion of the anima mundi, soul of the world, is a quote brought down to earth and particularized. So there's a way that, again, we're talking about the soul as a sort of mediating layer between ideas and things, where in Hillman's psychology, ideas get to come down to the level of the soul, but things are brought up into the soul. We get a quote from Hillman here. The Anima Mundi, the soul of the world, is now that particular soul spark, that seminal image, which offers itself through each thing in its visible form. Anima Mundi, soul of the world, indicates the animated possibilities presented by each event as it is, its sensuous presentation as a face, bespeaking its interior image. Soul given with each thing, all things show faces. They announce themselves, bear witness to their presence. Look, here we are. Look, here we are. They regard us beyond how we may regard them. This imaginative claim on our attention bespeaks a world ensouled. So we're talking about a way of relating with things that we're talking about animism, essentially. But we're also talking, we're starting to explore and uncover and unpack some of why animism is helpful to us. Because it allows us this bridge between all these deep splits within us, the individual and the collective, the idea and the thing, the abstract and the sensory, and the subject and the object. So it's allowing us, it's by recovering animism through phenomenology. And it doesn't have to be animism, it can be a way of seeing everything in its aliveness. I mean, I say animism because that's what animism is essentially, but it's allowing us to restore our sense of aspects of ourselves that we've forgotten long ago. I was reminded of Rilke. Everything here seems to need us. Everything here seems to need us. What I would connect, obviously, is that ever since we started to make stone tools, I think, we started to get this domination of the left hemisphere. We started to see everything in its way of being dead and inanimate and as objects to be moved around. And animism is a way to relate to the world, relate with things with more care, and counterbalance the tendencies that we've been stuck in for a very, very, very long time. Everything here seems to need us. Something here I wanted to unpack in this quote. It said, Anima Mundi indicates the animated possibilities presented by each event as it is. The animated possibilities. And so what I mean by this is that if we can practice in such a way as to restore our sense of perspectives, we can, for example, if I look at this way of seeing this mug, and I look at a different way of seeing the mug, you notice we never see the whole mug. We only ever see aspects. And as we practice phenomenology with objects or with ideas, for example, we also get aspects on a virtue like courage, then we start to not only unlock different perspectives on an object, which reveals itself to us, it shines forth in an aletheic way, but also withdraws from us because we can never see the whole object. What we actually unlock is possibility itself. So the idea would be to deepen our relationship with all of the objects and all of the ideas by inhabiting the perspective of the soul so that we can take the soul, we can take up the soul, and from out of the soul, relate differently, both with ideas and with things. And what would that relating look like? Well, it would be about uh, from out of the soul, practicing uh, dialogos and other kinds of practices in such a way to unlock our sense for different aspects of ideas and of things, in a way that when those aspects of ideas or things, they reveal a through line. I'm drawing from Vervaeke's After Socrates episodes, sort of 5 through 8. They reveal a through line. So there's like we never see, there's never one final aspect. We never see the whole object, the whole idea. But these different aspects, they reveal a through line to things and a through line to ideas that's in some sense equivalent to the soul of an idea, or the soul of an object. If we imagine like a human being, for example, is someone's soul ever visible? Well, no, not really. There's something quite deep there. For example, one of the main tests of creativity is to ask how many uses for a brick. And then the more answers someone can give in 2 minutes, say, the more creative of a person they tend to be. So what I'm connecting is that the more that we can animate. So I'm talking about the practice of animation. I'm saying by being able to see ideas and see things in from multiple different perspectives, we actually recover its aliveness. We recover a sense for the wholeness, the completeness of that idea or thing. And that's essentially equivalent to recovering like um ensouling. That's a Promethean quality. Whoa. Why is it Promethean? Well, Prometheus was the one who stole fire from the gods to infuse into these clay objects. So by inhabiting the soul and relating from out of the soul to see ideas or things in a multifaceted, multi-perspectival way with multiple people and from out of our different parts, the different aspects of our own soul, we actually restore the animation, the aliveness of ideas and of things. So we re-ensoul the world in both directions. And that not only binds ideas and things, it does two things at the same time. It's a way of restoring the aliveness of an idea in itself and restoring the aliveness of an object, animating in both directions. In Heidegger's sense, it's salvific. It saves something into itself. It removes all the obstacles for that thing so that it can be itself. But it also restores the connectedness. It also restores the connectedness through through the soul of mankind. And this is what allows me to say that I think the individuation of the world soul comes about when we can sort of knit being back together, when we can bring ideas back down to reality by animating them, and when we can bring objects up to reality by animating them, then we're actually individuating the world soul. So when I say Anima Mundi indicates the animated possibilities presented by each event as it is, then like as we practice in that way, when things happen, far more is possible. And it's because we see and experience things in a completely different way. Why is far more possible? Um, I think it's because we're less trapped in a single way of seeing something, essentially. when we restore ideas and objects and ourselves to aliveness, to animation, then we're also restoring a kind of flexibility or fluidity in our character, but also in our seeing, in our perceiving. And that allows us to choose navigational pathways that are that are optimal, that are best. So we unlock possibility itself, more possibility. The Anima Mundi is now that particular soul spark, that seminal image, which offers itself through each thing in its visible form. Anima Mundi indicates the animated possibilities presented by each event as it is, its sensuous presentation as a face bespeaking its interior image, soul given with each thing. All things show faces. They announce themselves, bear witness to their presence. Look, here we are. Here we are. They regard us beyond how we may regard them. They regard us beyond how we may regard them. This imaginative claim on our attention bespeaks a world ensouled. So that's what I meant when I said we're starting to unlock humanity as a living center. The idea that we as a I said the foveal fount or font, the foveal font. By foveal, I mean central, the fovea in the eye, the central point of the eye. So this is living center, the idea that the sacred role, task of humanity is to be a fountain of aliveness. And I don't just mean aliveness, I mean animation. I mean ensoulment. We don't have a responsibility merely to shepherd being, but actually to ensoul ourselves and to ensoul being. The living center, the foveal fount. Again, Rilke, everything here seems to need us. Yeah, and so we can now say with Avens, the eyes of the soul, or the ideas, by means of which we see, are the same eyes with which the world and everything in the world sees. The eyes of the soul, the ideas that are the means by which we see, are the same eyes with which the world and everything in the world sees. The ideas are not only inside our head, but out there in the world as well. Obviously, the fakeness of our culture works against this. It's a de-souling social media, for example. It's depersonalizing. And it does that because it reduces everything to a tool, everything to an object. This is Heidegger's standing reserve. When everything is like a mechanism, a tool for us to manipulate, then everything gets, the soul is taken out of everything. It's reduced, it's killed, actually. And so this way is a way that is less about, yeah, using objects as tools, cogs in a machine, and more about It's more about re-enchanting the world. But it's not in a romantic sense. It's actually that we might treat the world better and ourselves better. It's not because it's nice. It's because in part that it's necessary. I think again for me the deepest part of this was the existential part. And what I mean is that we actually unlock deeper awareness. We actually become more aware in this way. And not just more aware as ourselves, but we become aware as the world. We become aware as the world. And so when I said also that the ideas become not only inside our heads, but out there in the world, that's the quote from Avens. This is obviously connected with place-based knowing, and in indigenous law, so in neo-indigenous way. For example, in Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk, there's a way that the law of the land, this way that our stories and our memory, our ideas, and our law, whether it be the Ten Commandments or the three laws of thermodynamics, our law, LORE, is deeply connected with the place that we're in, because there are these relationships of correspondence between the things, and not only the things, but the places and the ideas. And so there's this networking, and it's a mapping process that is going on between the propositional and participatory layers or levels of our being. They're occurring deeply together. This is why ideas which are merely objects and which are decontextualized can be so dangerous, is because when they're applied locally, they can harm things. But the thing is that that works the other way as well. If ideas are only localized, then we can't network them up together. And so there's a tension there. Okay, so what I'm going to do, that was 2 pages. That was page 30, 31, and part of page 32 in Avens. And I'm going to pause this and keep going because I feel like that was a lot and I want to have that in one place.